Margaret Sangster, wrote that her father, former British Prime Minister E.W. Sangster, began to notice some uneasiness in his throat and a dragging in his leg when he went to the doctor. And he found out that he had an incurable disease that caused progressive muscular atrophy. His muscles would gradually waste away, his voice would fail, his throat would soon become unable to swallow. So E.W. Sangster threw himself into his Christian work in British Home Missions, figuring that he could still write and he could still have even more time for prayer. He said to the Lord, "Let me stay in the struggle, Lord. I don't mind if I can no longer be a general, but just give me a regiment to lead." He wrote articles and books and helped organize prayer cells throughout England. Gradually, E.W. Sangster's legs became useless. His voice went out completely, but he could still hold a pen shakily. And on Easter morning, just a few weeks before he died, he wrote a letter to his daughter. And in it, he said this. He said, "It's terrible to wake up on Easter morning and have no voice to shout, 'He is risen.' But it would be still more terrible to have a voice and not want to say it." This morning we are doubly blessed because we have voices and we want to shout that our Savior has risen. We gather here today and every Sunday because Jesus is no longer in the tomb. He has risen just as he said he would. The resurrection of Jesus is the central fact of the Christian faith. Without Jesus' resurrection, there would be no Christianity. There would be no church. We would not be here right now. Jesus' resurrection sets Christianity apart from all other religions. For other religions have ethical systems. Other religious systems have concepts of paradise and the afterlife. Other religious systems have their holy scriptures. But only Christianity has a God who became a man, who literally died for his people and was raised again in power and glory to live and reign forever. The resurrection is what sets Christianity apart. And if I asked you this morning, why is the resurrection important to you? You could create a long list of reasons why the resurrection is important. Before we get to the text in John chapter 11, I just want to share 5 reasons why I believe the resurrection is important. First, the resurrection is important because it gives us confidence. We know that history is going in a specific direction. It's not just cycling through over and over. We're not just in an endless loop. We are going toward a day when Jesus will come back and make all things right. So it gives us a confidence. That's why the resurrection is important. A second reason the resurrection is important is it gives us a future. Because of the resurrection, we know that death has been conquered and we too will rise from the dead. And that those of our loved ones who have gone on before us, that they will be raised from the dead. That death is not the end. It gives us a future. The third reason that the resurrection is important is that it gives us a purpose. It gives us a mission. The resurrection gives us authority to go out and be witnesses and to testify that Jesus has been raised from the dead. And that if you turn to him and ask him to forgive you, he will forgive you of your sin through his work on the cross. All the early church sermons, the evangelistic sermons, preached the resurrection. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, speaking to a crowd, he says, "For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures." Christ's resurrection gives us a purpose. It gives us a mission. A fourth reason that the resurrection is important is that it gives us hope. The resurrection helps us find meaning in every event in our life, in the good events and in the not so good events. When we face tragedies, we have hope because we know whatever that tragedy is, that's not the end. And the fifth reason that the resurrection is important, I believe, is that it gives us strength. In Romans chapter 8, we're told that the same power that raised Christ from the dead is working in us as Christians. That same power that gives us the power to overcome the obstacles that we face as we turn to God for help. So these are 5 reasons why I believe the resurrection is important. It gives us a confidence, a future, a purpose, a hope, and a strength. And today, as Christians around the world celebrate the resurrection for these 5 reasons and a multitude of other, I want you to know that this is not the first time. Jesus' resurrection is not the first time that he faced death, that he did battle with death. In our Bible passage for this morning, in John chapter 11, Jesus encounters death, and he raises his good friend Lazarus from the dead. Now, this is kind of a strange Easter text, the raising of Lazarus. But as you know, if you attend here regularly, as a church, we are reading through the New Testament together. And we call that program 27 in 2011. We're reading through the 27 books of the New Testament in the year 2011, 27 in 2011. And every Sunday we preach on a text from the last week's reading. And last week we read about Lazarus being raised from the dead. And so here is our text as we see Lazarus raise his good friend. And I will say that this isn't the first time that Jesus raises someone from the dead when he raises Lazarus. In Mark chapter 5, Jesus raises a 12-year-old girl, the daughter of a man named Jairus. And in Luke chapter 7, Jesus raises a widow, her only son. She's from Nain, and he raises her son to life. In fact, if you look through the New Testament, Jesus broke up every funeral he ever attended. Every time Jesus attended a funeral, he raised the dead person to life. But when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, it was different. It was different because all these other people who had died had just died. But when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. This was a miracle that could not be denied or avoided by the religious leaders. And in raising Lazarus from the dead, this is the event that caused the Jewish religious leaders to seek to kill Jesus. In John chapter 11, the chapter that was just read, in verse 46, it says, "But some of the Jews," after Jesus raised Lazarus, it said, "Some of the Jews went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done." He'd raised Lazarus from the dead. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called together the Jewish Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, and in verse 53, we find the outcome, what the outcome of that meeting was. It says in verse 53 of John chapter 11, "So from that day on, they plotted to take Jesus' life."